Okay, I need everyone in this room to yell at a really boring sentence that has been made 3 times today already. In about 6 seconds, you're supposed to yell. Привет, Moscow, как дела? Спасибо. Hello, everyone. I know it's already nap time, but unfortunately, you have to listen to another talk. This conference is amazing because they have tattoos, not stickers, not buttons, tattoos for my talk, which is pretty cool. So I will, later when I'm drunk, I might get a tattoo somewhere on my body parts. And if you do the same, we can be, I don't know, like friends forever or something. So Ruby is dead. Richard is dead. And Ruby is dead. In case you have not noticed, this is a special venue. The future is made here. I don't know if it says it in Russian, but it says it in English, and I can only speak and read English. I can read, by the way. There is a time machine in the back of this building. If you walk through the backstage room, which you're not supposed to do because you're not in the backstage room, there's a time machine. I actually came in a time machine from the future to the present to tell you a very terrible thing. Ruby is dead. Google Translate! This is not funny. Ruby is dead, yeah? It is so dead that people post videos on YouTube explaining how dead Ruby is. It is so dead that it's only on position number 9 on the most popular programming languages or anything. It's really, really dead. It's below iOS, it's below PHP, it's not as popular as Java and SQL, which is like the most amazing programming language, SQL. I don't know if you know how to program SQL. And if you look at this index, Ruby is somewhere here, and again, this is the program happiness index. As you can see, it's very, very low, so it's really, really unpopular. It's completely dead. You are investing your time in the wrong thing. I came from the future. I know what's happening in 25 years. Actually, I did not come from the future. This is, of course, impossible. But I went on the internet to find out why is Ruby dead. The internet is Reddit. Yeah? No Wikipedia, no Google, Reddit. On Reddit, you find 1,000 articles and rants about why Ruby is dead. My favorite one was, and is the favorite link I found is my authoritative source for information. It's called phpblog.net. And the article was, why I don't believe in Ruby and you shouldn't either. Ruby is no longer cool, it is JavaScript these days. This article is from 2017, by the way. And what kind of convinced me that we are investing our time in the wrong language is that Ruby was a hipster coder community of 20-something-year-old nerds who are now 30-something-year-old nerds. Even Ruby masters switch to Elixir. Okay, so Ruby is very dead. It sucks because its threading sucks, apparently. I learned that today. It is slower than, it's slower. We don't know slower than what, but it's slower. It is object-oriented programming. We all know object-oriented programming is very dead. We should only do functional programming. And I don't think functional programming works in Ruby, right? So we have to, I did not see Luca's talk. And Ruby is very messy. So the code that we write in Ruby is always automatically messy. This is why Ruby is a completely dead language, and it's going to be nothing. And the code you can throw away in 25 years. I come from the future. Also, Ruby is the reason why Rails exists. Okay, I am here not to rant. I'm here to actually talk about facts. Yeah, facts because I have turned and work for the dark side. Now I work for the police. It's a famous rock band, but unfortunately I work for the actual police that like kills people and stuff. I do not work for them, they are my clients. And I can't show you any code because it's very, very secret stuff. We had this incredibly interesting conversation would be too soft, discussion about so the police uses Ruby in a lot of projects, and they also use Java, and they also use PHP and some other languages like JavaScript, which is the new hipster language. And the question was, what is the next big project going to be? Is it going to be Ruby or is it going to be PHP? They hired a professional consultant to find out what is the better language. The consultant is not me. I was there to do Ruby. This consultant presented me with an incredibly interesting graph. You all know the, what is it called, Gartner's hype cycle, showing you the normal development of hypes and trends in programming languages, maybe even not in programming, I don't know. So basically there's a peak of inflated expectations. That's when you use that language, it's like amazing, we're going to use that, and all the features in the language are great. Then there's a trough of disillusionment. Oh shit, it doesn't work that way, it's really messy. And then at some point you get to the plateau of productivity. I totally agree with this cycle. And you should too, because diagrams are always right. The PHP/Ruby consultant was very convinced, he's actually a really nice guy, he was very convinced that Ruby is still at the trough of disillusionment and going into some even lower phase, and he invented like another level of that Gartner cycle. So he was very negative about Ruby. We had lots of discussions, lots of like technical battles, conceptual talks, and so on. We kind of agreed that Ruby and PHP are equally strong, like there's strengths in both languages, but they are not like super different. So what we figured out, or what he figured out, I mean, he basically taught me what proper engineering is. Gesundheit. Proper engineering, ladies and gentlemen, is creating code that is maintainable, comprehensible, and something, the third thing I already forgot. But that is what makes a good software. It is well designed, you have lots of abstractions, and you have diagrams that show how the software was supposed to work 5 years ago, and so on and so on and so on. So it's all about engineering. Yeah? It's not anymore about the language, it's about engineering. And we had a look at PHP. There's like lots of frameworks that have an incredibly good level of abstraction. Yeah? Engineering is about using and applying abstractions. There's like Code Igniter and Cake PHP. Send framework is great. I don't know how much you know about PHP. I used to do a lot of PHP, and I also know that a lot of those frameworks are way more advanced than Rails. Yeah? In Ruby, we have Rails, we have Pedrino, Hanami, which is great, and Rhoda, great. We have lots of frameworks as well, which give us equal, I wouldn't say an equal level of abstractions, but they have a good level of functionality, which is reflected in the fact that we have thousands of applications running in Ruby and not in PHP, even though PHP is leading. So we analyzed, so we didn't come to, like, we just didn't agree what is a good metric to find out which language are we going to use. So we had a look at all the PHP applications, and they had like thousands of PHP applications, all of them using a completely different stack of technology, no abstractions, no standards, nothing. And then we had a look at the Ruby projects, which were kind of newer than the PHP stuff, and kind of well architected, using standards, using abstractions that you find in every action, in every controller, in every model. There were additional abstractions. So there was kind of it looked if you draw it, it was more boring, it was less colorful because it's always the same stack, but that is exactly what we wanted. We wanted some stable architecture for the new application. And I couldn't find that in PHP. He could, apparently. We discussed this issue, and in the end of the day, I figured out for myself that the language is not the actual thing you should be deciding about. You should be deciding about what abstractions does the language give me, and what abstractions can I use from that language? Yeah, so the language itself is not the problem. We want to have higher level abstractions. Yeah, so the whole discussion, is PHP or Ruby going to be the new project, was completely wrong, because we should have talked about what language gives us better abstractions that we can use to reduce problems and to have less boilerplate code and all this kind of stuff. And both languages seemed to be quite primitive, where we actually needed proper tools, yeah? Because this is a complex field of applications and of the engineering at the police, because they have like software that tracks criminals and software that checks if you're supposed to drive and all this kind of stuff. So it should kind of work. Yeah. So we ended up picking PHP. I was not happy about it. Okay. So what I learned from this whole incident was that you should rant more often. Actually, is it okay if I rant a little bit about Ruby? Because in this whole conversation with this consultant, I kind of learned how people see Ruby. Is it okay if I rant? Please raise your hands. Is it okay? Should I not rant? Okay, so we got the majority to rant. It's interactive. It's JRuby or something. How else would you start a rant if it's not a DHH tweet? So I don't know if you saw this tweet. It's nothing special. Actually, this is all not a big deal. But basically, DHH was really happy that Ruby 2.3 or 2.4, I can't remember, gets a new method that is in active support, and this method is array prepend. And this is amazing. Like, array prepend is absolutely what we need in Ruby. Like, this is going to make my software better. I got really angry. I started to type a tweet like, who needs strict typing, pattern matching, modern concurrency, have fun, translator, method overloading, better keyword arguments, macros, real namespaces, blah, 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 monkey patching, and auto-loading once and for all, world peace, and a new fair world order when you can have array prepend. So I think you kind of get the idea. It didn't work because it was too long. Also, I forgot immutable data structures. So I don't know, this kind of thing, that reaction was triggered from that discussion with my police consultant. I kind of realized in the Ruby community, we are focusing, many of us are focusing on the right thing, in my opinion, but lots of people focus on the wrong thing. Like, it doesn't really matter if we have some syntactical sugar in Ruby, like array prepend. I mean, come on, that's another method on top of an object that already has 20,000 methods. So array prepend is not going to make my software stable and more maintainable. Yeah. So the problem we have in the Ruby community is that we constantly focus on like little tiny tweaks and language features and syntactical additions. But what we actually should focus on is like, how do we build better tools? Yeah, because I don't know, a little method addition is not going to help me. Okay, and you all already noticed that I have changed. I do PHP now. No, I'm just kidding. To show you what I mean by tools and how other languages do that, I want to have a look at an amazing programming language, which is called PHP. I think it's one of the two languages Boshida didn't want to mention. So PHP, you all laugh about PHP because it's php.net. Okay, at least one person got this joke. So PHP is not as backwards as you might think. So for example, they introduced something in PHP 7. They introduced something like modules in Ruby. I mean, I actually don't really understand the code, but it's like you basically define a module using a trait. They call it trait. In Ruby, it's a module, and then you have your functions, and then you can use, in Ruby, it would be include that module into a class, and it'll be instance methods. So that's a feature we use in Ruby, and in PHP, they did the same because they learned, hey, this is an actual helpful abstraction. They also have things like lambdas and callable objects now in PHP. I mean, I stopped PHP with PHP 5, but they copied good ideas from Ruby and implemented them within 1 or 2 years. I'm sorry to say that, but in Ruby, I don't know how long this would take. So they have lambdas and blocks in PHP now. Yeah, you define some callable object, and you pass it into a method and extend the method by that way. You can also have anonymous classes and anonymous instance in PHP now. It's not really a feature a killing feature, but it's basically really good if you write DSLs and declarative code. So they all, again, copied something from Ruby in a short amount of time because it has proven to be amazing. One thing I really miss in Ruby is interfaces. PHP comes with interfaces. So you define, hey, my interface iTemplate, for example, has to have 2 methods, and those 2 methods have the following argument, signature, blah, blah, blah. And then you can say, in this new class, which is called template, I want you to implement iTemplate functions. Otherwise, I'm going to say, stop, this doesn't work at compile time and not at runtime. In case you didn't know, PHP has typing. PHP 7 comes with typing. I find this an incredibly cool development. So you can say the return type of my function array sum, for example, is of type array. It could also be some, I don't know, higher level object or whatever, but you can define this method or function is going to return an object of a specific type. They also have typing for incoming variables, of course. So you can say the first argument should be an integer, and the second should be my object or something. And if you call the method with the wrong arguments, it'll tell you first argument was not this, but nil, for example. I don't know. I think this is happening at runtime, not compile time, but at least they have something that goes into that direction. Actually, I have really good news, because at the Ruby-KIGI, there were, I don't know, 3 or 4 talks about typing in Ruby to come. So I'm pretty excited about this, which is the only reason I came to this conference, because I'm going to stop Ruby unless we get typing in 5 years. I didn't say that. So yeah, PHP also has this new amazing feature in PHP 7, which is called GoTo. I don't think I have to explain it, and it's probably the reason I should stay with Ruby, because do we have GoTo in Ruby? Does anyone know? Okay. But they have a really nice logo. It's elephant. It's like GoTo elephant and stuff like that. Okay. Does anyone know this language? It's Java. Again, the Ruby community, we're like, Java, PHP, like funny languages. You're like writing so much code, and in the end you have to debug it, and you actually have really cool features. Oh damn! So again, like I kept following this idea of like, oh yeah, let's rant about Java and how bad PHP. And so have a look at Java. Java we all know from like you have to use an incredibly complex IDE, otherwise nothing's going to work. You have to have like lots of files, and there will be like massive object structures and XML files configuring how the editor works with whatever, and people writing books about how Java ruined their life. But they have typing, for example. Yeah? So in Java, again, you can say my method is going to return whatever, and my method is going to accept this kind of argument or these kind of arguments. So this is built into Java since, I don't know, like 25 years. How old is Java, by the way? They also have stuff like interfaces. So you can see I'm really like I like strict features that force you to do the right thing. I'm German, so I'm kind of strict and boring. So they have interfaces. You can say, this class needs to implement all methods of service provider, otherwise I'm going to tell you at compile time, which is great. And they have a feature I really miss in Ruby. Oh, God, I would pay money to get that feature, which is called method overloading. So method overloading basically allows you to have one function with the same name in several different versions. Yeah? And the different versions are distinguished by the arguments you pass in. So I can say the method user is uppercase. It's not Ruby convention, but whatever. I can say if it's first name and last name, this is my implementation. If there's 3 arguments with an age, I'm going to have a different implementation for that method. And that's actually pretty cool stuff, especially when you write gems or something and you want to deprecate methods. This would be such a great feature in the language, because we in Ruby have to write that feature manually with like if, else, and args, and I don't know, decompose the args array and stuff like that. So this is a feature in Java I find amazing. I would love to have that in Ruby. Java also has some built-in dependency injection mechanism. I have no idea how it works, but it sounds cool. And you can basically say, what kind of dependencies an object expects, and then Java will inject those dependencies at runtime automatically for you. So it's a bit like what Luca was showing with his action that received dependencies automatically. They have that in the language again. So stuff in Ruby, in Ruby, by the way, you can't even see. Why is no one telling me there's a cursor right in the view? Like you can't even see the slides. God. So stuff in Ruby we have to build manually all the time, build into Java, build into PHP. This is like the abstractions, the tools I'm talking about, yeah? So in Ruby we have to do that manually. And when you update Ruby 2.2 to 2.4, for example, all you get is like warning here, warning there, this is shadowing that variable, and blah, this is an unassigned variable. I mean, this is not innovation, this is some cool feature, but it doesn't help me to build a better application. And I find this kind of sad that we don't have this innovation pushes in Ruby, but we always have those little syntactical fixes, and like, you know, we add stuff, really helpful stuff like, did you mean that method? But we never actually break something or say, hey, let's add something like that actually changes the way we program. What was a really amazing addition was keyword arguments. I use them everywhere. They're really slow, but they're great. And if you use threads, it's faster, I guess. Right, Richard? Good. We got a yes. So keyword arguments is basically, instead of positional arguments, which you can mix, you say, I'm waiting for current user and view in a hash, and you can define default arguments, and then oops, something is very funny here. And so for example, you can say which argument should be defaulted. So if that argument is not available, it'll be show automatically and this kind of stuff. So you pass in a hash and Ruby finds out, okay, you want this and that. Here is your final argument chain. It's great. So you can save a lot of code with this. And that was added in Ruby 2.0, I think. And it's an amazing feature. You should all be using keyword arguments. Another interesting feature that is completely unnecessary in Ruby and has wasted so much time. I'm saying this knowing that this will be recorded, but I think that some features in Ruby are completely unnecessary, and I think Bojida was mentioning refinements. I'm also only mentioning them. No one in this room knows how refinements work, so basically, me neither, by the way. So you get the new keyword refine, where you can basically define a module, and that module kind of overrides an existing method, and then you inject that refinement using the method using, and it'll override an existing method. And I don't know, like whatever, the documentation is pretty scary, so you may only activate refinements at top level, not inside any class, module, or method scope. So this is kind of, I don't know how helpful this is supposed to be. And refinements are active until the end of file only, so in like local lexical context. So it's kind of completely, I don't even understand that, what it means. And I have seen many talks about refinements, and they all say don't use it. So why do we have a feature in Ruby that someone spent like a year on? That person could have spent time to write code for interfaces, for example. But anyway, the entire idea in Ruby is wrong to have methods override methods, override methods, override methods, and you call them with super, and in the end you have like 15 different methods changing the way a method, like if you look at Rails helpers, for example, like URL for, and you want to find out how they work, it's basically impossible because the concept is wrong of having this mechanism of overriding methods, overriding methods, overriding methods. So maybe something like the Elixir pipe operator, for example, just as a conceptual idea, could be better, where we simply change the entire concept of how we override code or how we inject code to change like a pipeline of functions. Yeah, so maybe we should think about like changing stuff conceptually instead of adding array prepend. I'm still angry. And my favorite feature is the safe navigation operator, also known as the Keanu Reeves operator. I don't know if you, what do you think about this operator? It was a great addition in 2.3, I think, or 2.3. I've seen it in many applications. It's kind of useful. So the idea is, instead of having to like test, okay, do we have user profile? Do we have user profile thumbnails? So the idea was that you don't want to do this, so they introduced try, and that was actually not the worst idea in active support because they realized, hey, this code sucks, let's make it better. So I think try was not the worst idea. not a fan of it. Anyway, but this was taken into Ruby core, and we got a new operator that kind of makes this easier. The result is that your code is even harder to understand, because if nil comes out here, you have no idea where it came from. So it's kind of handy in the first 5 minutes, and then it gets really hard to track. I am critical if this was a great idea. Typing in Ruby is basically undefined method each for nil class. So I've had this error, not for each, for any kind of method, 100 million times in my life. And I pray to God, I don't know, I have a special God to make Mats and his crew work on typing for Ruby, because typing would save me from this error at compile time, telling me, hey man, you can't pass nil into that method because you're supposed to pass in a user object. And imagine you had some language that tells you what to do. That'll be amazing. So the whole features we've added in the past couple of years were, in my opinion, a bunch of toys with some nice additions like keyword arguments, maybe the safe navigation operator we can argue about. I know Bujita hates it. I talked to Mats a lot about this kind of stuff, and we both have a dream. Don't get confused by I, it's actually we. So Mats sees all the problems in Ruby and the problems application developers have, because if you work on a programming language, that doesn't necessarily mean you understand what application developers like us have problems. For example, the safe navigation operator was a result of Rails people saying, hey, we have this decoration problem all the time, please fix it in the language. Yeah? So to give you a brief idea about, so you know what I want, yeah? Where I would love Ruby to go. I'm not saying I want Ruby to be statically typed and everything, but I want those kind of conceptual changes in the language to leverage, to level up the way we write applications. And at the moment, we write them ourselves. Yeah, for example, the toys we have, it's funny that this conference is exactly uniting all the developers of those gems. Is one of the tools I love to use is DryRB. Yeah, DryRB is a project by Piotr Solnitsa. He's probably not in the crowd, but whatever. And he's sleeping. And DryRB gives us a huge tool set of new functions and abstractions you might want to use in your application. Like they have dry validation is the most popular one. They have dry types, so you can do coercion and stuff. They have dry logic to chain conditions in a declarative way, so you don't have to program that kind of stuff. And they have lots of other stuff which is amazing. Speaking of amazing, they have a great website which is really uncommon for open source projects with documentation. And so one of my favorite tools is the dry validation class. So you basically define, this is going to be my input. This is how the input should be validated. For example, name should be filled, so it should be present. And my age should be greater than 18. And then you apply this validation to a hash using the call method. Yeah, and that's all you can do. There's no way you can use that in the wrong way. So again, we have functional style callable objects. It's very, very simple. And it'll give you a result with that contains either error messages or will tell you everything was fine. So that's a really minimalistic API and a great tool if you write software applications. And it basically says goodbye to active model validations and is used in a lot of libraries like Hanami, also in Reform, but whatever. The download statistics, my dear audience, you can see that on this hockey stick, shows that they already broke through the break even, and this is a tool that a lot of people use, and this, of course, because they have this amazing, great, well-documented website and really cool tools. You should absolutely check this out. And just to say something, for example, dry container is another tool I love using. It is basically what Luca was talking about with container defining all your dependencies, auto-loading those dependencies, and injecting those dependencies. This is already implemented in dry RB. It's great stuff. The other tool I see as a shining star on the horizon hey, okay. It's Hanami. We just saw the talk, so I only put in some little slides. So they have an amazing website, amazing documentation, pretty uncommon for open source projects. And so they have the generators and code generators, all this kind of stuff like Rails. They have routing. Luca was showing all that. They have callable objects for every action. So instead of controllers, they have actions, and this again is a callable object, so they have like a higher level API. They provide a lot of functions out of the box, like they have validations, they have models, repositories, all kinds of. I actually was hoping that Luca talks more about repositories, but it doesn't matter. So they give you a lot of new abstractions to write web applications. They also give you like tools, yeah, actually in the tool set, like generators or the asset pipeline on mailing tools and all this kind of stuff. They also have a nice view layer replacement for action view, which is great. So Hanami gives you what we call an infrastructure, or is an infrastructure framework for writing web applications. What is still vague in Hanami by choice, apparently, is that the way you write your actual application business logic is not really defined. They have this interactor gem you just saw, but I think it's in a really early stage. So I see Hanami as the ideal partner for an amazing gem called Trailblazer, because Trailblazer plugs into Hanami perfectly. I mean, actually, Trailblazer also plugs into Rails perfectly. So basically what Trailblazer does, and this is the third kind of tool I want to show, is that it allows you to embrace your business logic of your application without caring about routing, without caring about mailing and tools and database and stuff. It only focuses on how do I help you to improve the way business logic works. Yeah, just a really quick example. We also got this like a new slogan, Advanced Business Logic Framework, and you might be laughing, but Trailblazer also has an amazing website with lots of documentation, really, really uncommon for open source projects. God damn it. And you should check it out. But now let's see. Trailblazer, again, is not supposed to replace Rails, Hanami, Rhoda, whatever. Trailblazer business logic. It introduces some kind of advanced directory structure where you have technology and then the actual implementation sitting in a concept folder. So we kind of reversed what Rails does, where you have technology, concept, code. We say concept, technology, code. Yeah, it's better to navigate, it's more intuitive, it's like different than Rails, and everyone's like, oh my God, but it's great. We introduced something called, when I say we, that's because I work on Trailblazer, just in case you didn't know. I also got stickers and lanyards, merchandising, come and to get them later. So we introduced something called operation, which is basically the main element how you compose your application's business logic. Again, we do not care about routing, about controllers, about view rendering. This is all about how am I writing the actual code that is executing my business logic. The cool thing about encapsulating this in an operation is that controllers get really simple now. Actually, there was a great talk about Trailblazer a few hours ago by Sasha and what's the other friend, Vladimir or something. I'm sorry if I said the wrong name. You all were there, I saw you. So I don't need to talk about Trailblazer that much. But the idea is that these callable operations are, again, callable objects. No way you can screw up state. And they basically take over everything after routing and before you render the results. So in Luca's talk, that would be the 5 steps you saw on this 9 bullet point list. Yeah, so we really don't care about routing, that's done by Rails, and we really don't care about how is the rendering done. You call your operation, and the operation is supposed to do everything you need to create a blog post, for example. Yeah, and we use this callable object style because it rocks, because you can't screw around with an instance of an operation. And the cool thing is you can also test that operation the exact same way you use it in a controller. And that makes Trailblazer pretty advanced in testing because you're not worrying about how do I test my code. In Rails, it's like view test, model test, integration test, controller test, service object test, this test, that test. In a Trailblazer stack, you can still have those tests, but you're testing all the side effects, all the edge cases via a simple operation test, and that's simply by calling that operation and testing the side effects. Hey, that's a service object. Woo! Yeah. So Trailblazer, again, does not care about all the infrastructure stuff. You can use the framework of your choice. I would say you should use Hanami. Why is that slide twice here? Okay, so Trailblazer gives you, beside the fact that we encapsulate the business, you can use any kind of ORM or database framework you want. You can use Hanami's models, Hanami repository, you can use ROM, you can use Active Record. We don't care. You just give us objects to persist data. Am I talking too fast? I hope not. Trailblazer gives you a separate validation layer, a separate layer for policies, yeah, for rules. Am I allowed to create a blog post? It gives you more stuff like deserializers to parse documents and all this kind of stuff. Also gives you control flow, and it's like amazing stuff. Like so, yeah, I should have redesigned this slide a little bit. Anyway, so if we look at a really quick example, we have the blog post, and then we have a folder operation which has a file create.rb. This is the so-called operation, the heart of the Trailblazer architecture. Operation, operation, operation. As an example, let's say we had to write an operation that creates a blog post, assigns some UUID from the database to that blog post model, saves it to the database, updates the total post counter. So this is like a blog application, and if you visualize this in a diagram, you get this beautiful like pipeline. Create the model, do something with the UUID, save it, update the counter, successful. Let's say we also had to catch a potential UUID error. Let's say this would be possible. You would have another step after save saying, okay, let's figure out if there was an error. Otherwise, if there was an error, fail. Otherwise, keep going down the pipeline. I say pipeline in reference to Hanami interactors. And let's say there's also another error that could be that the counter error is like the counter counting all the blog posts might be overflowing or something. Let's say there could be an error in the database or in the, I don't know what. You want to have another step to make sure that update counter is also handled in case there was an error. So visually, we all understand this is pretty simple. So in Trailblazer, in the standard implementation, this would be kind of what an operation does internally. Yeah? If something goes wrong in model, we go straight to UUID error. If something goes wrong in update counter, we go straight to counter error. Otherwise, we go down the pipeline. It's pretty simple. And diagrams are great, but to relax after all these requirements we have to program, look at this beach in the Philippines and just ask yourself, why am I in Moscow without any beaches? So again, look at this. Look at this diagram, at this flow. In Trailblazer, you would program this kind of flow by using an operation, and with our step DSL, you can basically define a pipeline, yeah, or whatever. Actually, this is more than a pipeline. You can have any kind of workflows in an operation, and you call that operation, and you get back a result object, and that result object tells you I was successful or I was not successful. Yeah. So how does the operation know if it was successful or not? Well, easily, if it ends on this state, it was successful. If it ends here, it was not successful. Yeah. So if we hit UUID error or counter error, we were not successful, and you add those error handlers with the failure method. So this is basically all you need control code to implement this workflow I was just showing. There should be another slide, but I think I deleted it or something. So this is all the API or like usage of the operation you need to create beautiful workflows or pipelines. You might wonder yourself, you want to ask yourself why, how does that actually work? I mean, now I have this workflow configured. How do I actually implement it? It's very simple. Steps in a Trailblazer operation are simply a method on the operation, or a callable object, or a lambda, or a proc. But in this case, I'm using an instance method, and you simply add those steps to that operation, and they receive only one object that is the only mutable object in that operation. And then you write to that mutable object, and this information will be available outside. It's pretty great, because when you call this operation, it returns a result object, and the result object gives you all the data you just wrote to it. So the only way to communicate with the outer world in Trailblazer is that result object I was just showing. Yeah, so it doesn't really matter if you got all this code right now. The idea of Trailblazer is we give you abstractions that are already available in other languages per default in a really nice and accessible way. Yeah? You define your control flow, your pipeline. Actually, it can be more than just a pipeline. And Trailblazer will make sure it is executed in the right order and you only focus on implementing those little steps and boxes. Does that look familiar, Luca? The only thing you need to know is you can redirect the flow from the successful path to the error path by returning true or false or nil from a step. And if it's false or nil, the Trailblazer will go on the error handling track. This has changed a little bit in 2.1, Trailblazer 2.1, coming in a couple of days or weeks or 3 to 5 years. So I'm trying to demonstrate it's really simple to implement complex workflows with kind of little pieces of logic. I love diagrams. I have drawn so many diagrams since we started working on this new workflow feature in Trailblazer. It's great. Yeah. So this was only the basics of what Trailblazer does, what Hanami does, what dry-RB gives us, yeah? And you might think, what is that? Yeah, this was the slide they were supposed to come earlier. So you might ask yourself, hey, wait. So this talk about Hanami just now, the Trailblazer talk earlier, my talk now, the dry stuff you learned today, there are so many objects and so many new abstractions, and like code is encapsulated. This is not like the Ruby way, this is so different. And also there's like, what about the garbage collection? Is this going to work? And all that stuff we were just doing, and like, that's like almost proper engineering. Isn't that too enterprise? And I think we are, with all those new tools we're adding to Ruby, and all those new gems we're adding to Ruby, I think we're on a good path, because when you think of enterprise, you either think of a starship, then you're really nerdy, or you think of beautifully designed diagrams and engineering and people in suits and saying like, we have this workflow and that workflow, and this has to be I don't know, like a Java, you need like Java abstract factories and this kind of stuff. If you look at the definition of enterprise, it is a software to satisfy the needs of multiple users. So you're all, even the people leaving, they're all writing enterprise software every day. So why are we scared of enterprise, the word in Ruby in the community? What's wrong with writing applications that work? I don't know. And you don't need to be a certified Oracle expert, as it says, whatever an expert is. I should have listened to Bojida's talk. You don't have to draw and like create massive inheritance and whatever and factories, and you don't have to use the 7 lines of indentation of factory methods like in Java. But you also don't. You're not supposed to use a super simple, really, really primitive stack like Ruby on Rails with its MVC. We had this today a lot. If you want to write stable software, yeah. So when we think of stable enterprise software, we think of state machines, yeah. And there's only access state machine in Ruby. There's no other gem. I actually did a lot of searching because we introduced state machines and like enterprise diagrams and stuff in Trailblazer, yeah. So there's a standard called BPMN, Business Model Process Notation, and you basically draw lines and arrows and boxes and deciders and whatever, and you kind of look at this thing and you understand this is going to happen in my software, and that's pretty cool, and that's the opposite of not cool, which is like enterprise, whatever, you know it. So there's like lots of words you need to learn, activity and blah, 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 business process. You actually don't have to learn it because BPMN is super simple. Yeah, and so BPMN is a diagram language to specify business processes so that everyone can understand them. Even my mom, who's really smart, by the way. So in Trailblazer 2.1, what we do is we introduce a graphical editor where you can render operations and operation compounds, and where you can also generate control code from those diagrams. So we kind of lift up the idea of control flow to something visual. It might sound really bizarre, but you will see on in the next couple of weeks or months or 3 to 5 years how we kind of decouple control flow from the actual implementation. So enterprise is nothing you should be scared of. It's nothing you should say, oh my God, this is too complicated. Why would I use a dry container? Why would I use Hanami if I can use Rails? You want to build stable applications, applications that are fun to work with, fun. to work. Yeah, those two words can be in the same sentence. In like 2 years and 5 years, and I got 2 minutes on my timer. Why are you saying stop? So enterprise is something, enterprise basically equals stable software, and that's why we all are here, I guess. Okay? So don't get confused, don't get scared of writing good code by using amazing new tools that we have that hopefully get transported into the actual language at some point, 3 to 5 years. mRuby was a big hope for me because I thought that it might introduce things like typing. Mats emailed me today saying there won't be any typing in mRuby. I'm very sad. But mRuby is a brand new implementation of Ruby with a lot of stuff not implemented, like, for example, auto-loading. So I think mRuby might be a good chance to change some stuff in Ruby. Anyway, I have to stop because I can see the CTOP thing. I'm on Twitter, also Skype and Facebook, and add me, we can be friends, it's going to be great. And don't forget that we have to do the tattoo thing later at the after party, okay? So you've been a brilliant audience. Thank you very much.
Ребята, у кого есть вопросы?
Hello, my name is Pavel, and I use Trailblazer a lot. Some of the gems, for example, Reform, and I know that it uses dry validation in it. And you said about operations, and the interface is very similar to dry transactions with dry monads under the hood. So, as I understand, you use it under the hood in operations, or it's different products?
Test. I used to. I played around with dry transaction and dry monads, but.
Yes. Do operations include dry transactions and dry monads under the hood?
No. That's the operation control code is like 20 lines of code. So I decided to implement it myself, even though I think that dry transaction is a really, really cool thing. But since we want to go the way where we allow more complex control flows with ifs and else and deciders, I thought it's a better idea to keep the code to myself, even though I would love to use as much from dry RB as possible. But at the moment, it's easier to just design new features with our own code, which is like 20 lines of code, really.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nick. You're kind of rock star in Ruby conference world. So my question is, today previously, two guys already talk about Trailblazer, and one of the slides says that Trailblazer has good documentation and great book. Yeah, but come on. Are you gonna do a great documentation and book about Trailblazer 2 or 2.1?
So the plan is, because I learned from past mistakes, the plan is to invest a lot of time in new documentation, online, better structured. I actually already started to document 2.1. And so we also changed the structure of the documentation because it sucks at the moment. I mean, it's better than nothing, but it's not the best. And the new book is something I can't promise anything because it's such a lot of work to write a book, really, especially when the stuff you write about changes every day. I mean, not every day, but you know what I mean.
So when we should wait a new documentation?
You mean to start with Trailblazer, or to start with Trailblazer 2.1?
2.1, yeah.
Well, before we launch Trailblazer 2.1, there will be enough documentation to satisfy 75% of our users. Yeah. So we won't discuss every new little detail, but it will be new. There will be new guides, a new example application that's also missing, and the API reference is completely restructured. So, I mean, you can start today because it's already, the release candidate is already in the 2-1 branch on Trailblazer, but you have to kind of look through the tests or something, which is not cool. Maybe wait for 1 or 2 more weeks and there might be more documentation. I'm promising this.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Nick, thank you.